All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fifth session of the Early Career Speaker Series, hosted by the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism here at Indiana University. My name is Daniel Mieling, and I serve as the Sumerian Research Fellow at ISCA, which is part of the Born Jewish Studies program here at IU. And I'm very delighted to be your moderator for our today's session. Before we begin, let me just share a few words about this series. So the idea was to showcase the innovative work of emerging scholars who bring fresh perspectives into the study of anti-Semitism. And we actually launched, if you joined for the first time today, we launched this series in early September. And throughout this semester, we are in total featuring 12 speakers across 6 sessions. And today actually marks already our fifth session. And if you missed any of the previous talks, well, don't worry. We recorded each of the previous sessions and we will make them available on our YouTube channel. In general, each session runs about 90 minutes. And typically each speaker presents for roughly 30 minutes, and that is followed then by a Q&A. And we are very thrilled to have you with us today for our session focused on anti-Semitism in academic and progressive contexts. And we have two outstanding speakers lined up for today. And our first speaker will be Perla Matusov. She's a doctoral researcher at Brock University, specializing in contemporary anti-Semitism in academic and institutional contexts. And Perla's work combines discourse analysis and psycholinguistics to distinguish between anti-Semitic rhetoric from legitimate critique, and that with a particular focus on its impact on Jewish students and academics. So Perla's academic background includes studies at Paris 8 University at France and Brock University in Canada. And Perla is deeply engaged in educational and community initiatives addressing Holocaust memory, Jewish identity, and anti-Semitism in Canada. And she also serves as a research fellow at the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. Perla's talk today is titled Examining Anti-Semitism in Anti-Zionist Academic Discourse. And Perla, we are very happy that you are able to join us today and present on your work. We are very happy to have you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, sorry. That's good. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be sharing insight from a research project that explores how anti-Semitism can manifest in academic discourse through the language of scholarship itself. When we think of anti-Semitism on campus, most people picture protest encampments or swastika or even online harassment, and those are indeed serious issues. But when we think, and the way that we react to those overt forms of anti-Semitism, there is generally some outrage when a swastika is found on a campus. You know, there are bad actors, it's disruptive, it's offensive, it's contested. There is no much debate whether those are anti-Semitic or not. But there's another layer that's often but there's another layer that's often escapes attention, and it's when anti-Semitism is embedded within academic discourse itself, within the language of scholarship, in articles, conferences, and lectures that are peer objective, yet reproduce harmful ideologies. So this is, for example, part of a dramatic arts puppet show that some students at my university were meant to sorry, I'm realizing where it was a mandatory participation for this dramatic arts show that portrayed Jews with anti-Semitic stereotypes, long noses, they were throwing money, and all kinds of historical tropes. And when it was contested as anti-Semitic, that happened in November of 2023. It was debated whether it was really anti-Semitic, I mean, whatever it was really problematic because it was part of academic freedom. And, so those are also other examples when discourses on anti-Zionism sometimes can, have what can look like as very anti-Semitic components, and yet they are contested as having academic freedom and just representing a political stance. So my research focuses on this less visible layer of anti-Semitism that hides behind academic authority. And one of the reasons why those are more debated and less contested is because when anti-Semitic ideas are embedded in the scholarship itself, the academic community lacks objective framework and language to discern between. I'm having a little bit of with like the here. Between political speech, academic freedom, and whether it's contentious or harmful. So one way that we can try to answer these questions, whether it is harmful, we can look at the impact. How does this discourse impact Jews? And another way to look at it is to look at the discourse itself and to see whether these are there markers in the rhetorics that can examine objectively and systematically the discourse. So the aim of this research is to provide an evidence-based approach to evaluating the presence of anti-Semitism in academic discourse. At the heart of academia is the search for truth, and when anti-Semitism enters the space, the response must also be academic, rooted in evidence, language, and method, not emotion or politics. So the overarching goal of this project is to provide an evidence-based approach to evaluating anti-Semitism in academic discourse. In other words, we want to see if we can detect criteria, so establish linguistic and semantic markers that can reliably identify anti-Semitic content in scholarly writing, and whether those markers can help us differentiate between critique and hate. And this would also strengthen academic accountability. In other words, can we detect anti-Semitic patterns not by intuition or outrage, but by applying linguistic and psycholinguistic tools that give us objective, applicable indicators? This approach also protects academic freedom, academic integrity, and it allows us to challenge harmful ideas using the same scientific and analytical methods that define good scholarship. So, just trying to, okay. So why is it important? It's important specifically to look at this discourse because universities are sites of production of knowledge. And for Jewish academics and students, repeated exposure to these academic narratives without recognition leads to what researchers have called traumatic invalidation, the experience of being gaslit about your own oppression. And this research matters because it helps prevent harm, promotes a truly inclusive campus culture, and protects academic integrity by challenging pseudo-scholarship, writing that imitates critical inquiry but violates its ethical core. So true academic integrity means holding ourselves and our colleagues accountable to evidence, clarity, and fairness, even and especially when the topic is politically challenged. So what has been done already in these areas? So to approach this systematically, I first looked at what has already been done related to this research. And prior research has successfully analyzed anti-Semitic language in media and social media, general media and social media, especially through the Decoding Antisemitism project, which has its roots in a lot of the work from Friesel, from Monika Schwartz-Friesel and Yehuda Reinhardt. And so they've looked at language, but mainly online. And Carrie Nelson and others have also looked at what has been the discourse in academic spaces, and they have critiqued anti-Semitic ideologies in academia conceptually, but not linguistically. So to our knowledge, this is the first study to apply these linguistic frameworks directly to academic writing itself. And this led us to two questions. First, can anti-Semitism be systematically identified in anti-Zionist academic discourse using psycholinguistic analysis? Is it possible to detect anti-Semitic meaning patterns within scholarly language? And what linguistics and affective markers characterize anti-Semitic discourse in academic writing? What does it look and sound like semantically and emotionally? Before I can, the goal is to try to answer these questions objectively, but we rarely come to research with total neutrality and objectivity. So it's important to acknowledge first our positions. So I am an insider and outsider to the research as an Israeli French Jewish woman with a deep connection to Jewish heritage and history. And I'm a scholar of social psychology and psycholinguistics that give me the tools to attempt to answer these questions objectively. So the aim is through objectivity is through transparency and not neutrality. And to do that, we utilize the scientific method and go, transparently through those. We look at observation. So we're seeing here in text some anti-Israel discourse that seems anti-Semitic. And sorry, I am really struggling with that. Okay, here. Sorry. Trying to press the buttons and it's not working. So, okay, so we look at a scientific method. We have an observation, research question. We gather the data, we apply clear methods to the data, and then we analyze the data. So we try to answer the questions with evidence with what we see. And for that, this is what we did for this specific research. We first gathered the data. So there are 6 blog posts. So it's a case study that looks at 6 blog posts from a Canadian academic. So they were not published, but they were written. And they are no longer available, but we retrieved them through Wayback Machine. And they were written between October 2023 and May 2024. The corpus has 76 pages in total. And we applied to it a dual approach to analysis as a qualitative analysis that looks at what is said, what the content is. It's a semantic analysis, and then an affective analysis that uses dependency parsing. And for each one of those analyses, we've looked at the content, through coding and through coding the tropes and what is being said, And for the dependency parsing, we looked at the valence and intensity rating. And then we analyze this data. So I'm going to show you like exactly what we've done. So for the semantic analysis, we used MaxQDA to apply the decoding antisemitism framework and other well-established frameworks, and which is a psycholinguistic lexicon of anti-Semitic tropes in combination with critical discourse analysis. And each passage was examined through 3 lenses, whether it crosses the gray area, what stereotypes it reproduces, and what linguistic forms it carries. So the conceptual frameworks they're based on are the already established literature on the Israelization of anti-Semitism and critical discourse analysis, because we need to contextualize, certain things that may not be evident to an uninformed reader. And we applied 4 levels analysis to the coding, looking at the content. So some were deductive, so based on frameworks that already exist, and some that emerged from doing the research. So the 4 levels of analysis were the content itself, what claims are made, how Jewish identity is framed or positioned in those claims, how claims are justified rhetorically, and how claims are made to appear credible or academic. And those are 4 interconnected levels that complement each other, but are pretty distinct whenever we annotate them. And we look, for example, at this text: Zionists may not agree with Norman Finkelstein that a celebration of blood lost not only by Israel's government and military leaders, but also Israeli Jews makes Israeli society a satanic and lunatic society. So we're trying to answer those questions. What is being said? What's the form? What's the legitimization? And then we code. Okay, so here there is a component of Norman Finkelstein is being mentioned. Zionists are celebration of blood lost. Israeli Jews make Israeli society a satanic and lunatic society. And those are coded and annotated with classic trope content, Jewish identity construction, demonization and demonization, tokenized authority as good Jew and bad Jew. So this forms, for example, the Jewish identity construction. And we've done that for the entire corpus, and quite a few of those codes were present. I'll just show you like one example of what was like how frequent they were throughout the corpus. And as the themes that emerged mostly from all of it were Holocaust inversion, essentialization, so both of Jews and Israel, collective guilt, and pseudo-scholarship. So I'll briefly mention the themes, and then I'll go to the next part, which is the affective analysis. So Holocaust inversion was most pervasive. It uses Holocaust terms to accuse Jews and Israel of doing a Holocaust of Gaza, final solution, Judeo-Nazi. It reframes the victims of the perpetrators, and it appears repeatedly throughout the texts. Then we have, next is essentialization. So the claim that Israel or Zionism is evil by nature. So this shifts already from critique of what is done to a claim of what it is. Language, like inherently genocidal, always the plan, or even satanic, fixes a moral essence to a people or a state. And that's not analysis, it's metaphysics. Once essence is defined as evil, evidence becomes irrelevant and condemnation is baked in. And this is also pretty prevalent throughout the text. And if evil is Israel's essence, then we know this is not critique because it cannot be reformed and it must be eliminated. We also see a progress about how it evolved across the year. We can see a clear progression in a clear progression from moral critique to collective blame sorry, this is not this. From inherent logic to murder, cult, demonic, satanic, it becomes more and more intense. So in the beginning, in October 2023, it focused on inherent logic, framing Zionism as structurally totalitarian, as if it were encoded in its very design. By December, the tone escalates. In April, the argument shifts towards inevitability. Genocide was always the plan, implying a moral philosophy of hate. And finally, by May 2024, it reaches a theological register, demonic forces of Zionism, satanic and Atlantic society. The key point here is that the semantic drift to metaphysics, from political critique to metaphysical evil, from logic to murder to demon to Satan. And this shows how language evolves. The next theme that emerged is collective guilt. So this is where anti-Semitism becomes unmistakable. Here, the text moves from moral critique to collective blame, the idea that all Jews share responsibilities for Israel's action. For example, one passage says, no European Jews alive cannot know, implying that every Jew, by virtue of being Jewish, is complicit in supposed crimes. So this is a classic anti-Semitic structure. It collapses Israel, Zionism, and Jews into one moral category so that critique of policy becomes an accusation of a people. And we also see a slippage, that it goes from critique of Israel, then Zionists, then Jews. And another theme that emerged was pseudo-scholarship. So what it is, it's an elaborate scholarly apparatus. It looks scholarly. The texts, the 6 blog posts look scholarly. There's 45 footnotes, diagrams, citations, theoretical frameworks, but it's missing actual evidence and methodology. So it's form without substance. That creates an appearance of rigor while masking absence of actual evidence or methodology. And that it matters because it makes anti-Semitic content look academic. It gets published. I mean, this one was not published, but sometimes, it does. He did try to publish it, and it circulates in academic spaces. And it's harder to challenge because it looks scholarly. So an uncritical reader will just say, oh, the professor so-and-so said that, or this is what it says in this article. And it's harder, it's more dangerous in some way. So the core themes identified were, essentialization, slippage and collective guilt, Holocaust inversion, and pseudo-scholarship. And it's pretty clear here that the discourse does more than merely critique Israel. It moralizes identity and collectivizes blames. Familiar tropes are repackaged in intellectual language, making them harder to identify as hate. And bias emerges here through semantic framing, where familiar anti-Semitic tropes are disguised as analytical reasoning. So these findings reveal the building blocks of prejudice, the linguistic architecture that argumentation will then activate and defend. So the argumentation strategies that emerge as well were denial of anti-Semitism, moral self-aggrandizement, illusory truth of repetition. If something is repeated enough times, it becomes true, or even juxtaposition. If there is a strong framing and right next to it you put an example without showing any parallels, that also gives an impression that you just use a very strong theoretical framework without really showing a connection. It's an illusion of truth. So pseudo-scholarship, it uses academic language, theory, citations to legitimize hate. Now, in this part, so this was the semantic analysis where we see how things are said in order to make prejudice look like what is said, and how it's said in argumentation forms to bring logic to prejudice. And now we move to, we're going to go briefly over the effective analysis of this study. In this part, we asked, is this neutral critique or moral condemnation? And to explore that, we applied linguistic frameworks that help identify emotion and moral judgment in texts. So we look at valence, whether the tone is positive, negative, or neutral, and intensity, the strength of that emotion, to see how these moralized patterns gain persuasive power. We grounded this work in appraisal theory and affective polarization. And And we used text parsing to process this. So text parsing is a process of analyzing a string of characters to determine its grammatical structure, which involves breaking it down to components, here phrases, then words. So using dependency parsing, we can identify relationships between the words Jews and Israel, and then assign valence, the tone and intensity, emotional strength. The sentence we're looking at here is, dissenting Jews hold a view of Israel as a Nazi state. When we break it down linguistically, each part plays a role in shaping meaning. Dissenting modifies Jews, framing them as the good Jews who oppose Israel. Hold is the action, view is the object, and of Israel as Nazi state provides the moral framing, a strongly negative moral comparisons. So for this example, Jews are coded as negative, moderate intensity, because the tokenization serves as a moral contrast against other Jews. Israel is coded as negative, strong intensity, because it's equated with Nazism and an extreme moral inversion. This type of analysis allows us to quantify how often these emotional and moral framings appear across different targets. Jews, for this case, we looked at Jews, Israel, Zionists, Palestinians, and Hamas. So each sentence becomes a part of a measurable pattern showing how meaning and emotion interact in the discourse. Here's how we conducted the effective analysis. After parsing all the text, each sentence that mentioned one of our targets of interest, like Jews, Israel, Zionists, Palestinians, Hamas, and Muslim, was extracted as a separate segment. In total, we began with 1473 parsed segments. After removing duplicates, headings, and parsing errors, we had 774 final analyzed segments. Each of these segments was then rated for valence and intensity by two independent coders, one of them myself, and the other one, my co-researcher, Daniel Milling. And valence measures the emotional direction, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative, and intensity measures the emotional strength from mild to extreme, one being not intense and 5 very intense. So what you see in the table is just a small portion of the data set. Each row represents a single sentence with its target term and how that term was emotionally framed in context. This process let us move from subjective impression to quantifiable affect, producing measurable results that we could visualize statistically. And sometimes they had the same sentence had a few targets, a few objects. Like, so here we have Zionism, Jews, and Palestinians. And so for each one of them is rated within the sentence. So here, here you can see like how we rated them, like rater 1 and rater 2, so 2 raters, and the intensity we gave to each one of them. And when we put all of the 174 cases together, and we had means. So the inter-rater reliability showed high agreement between the coders. And you can see that the language around Zionism and Israel carries strong negative valence and high emotional intensity. The mentions of Jews and Hamas are also negative, but with less intensity, while Palestinians are consistently framed positively. This quantifies the emotional pattern of the discourse at a glance. This figure visualizes the mean valence and intensity for each key term. The results show a clear emotional asymmetry. Israel and Zionism are portrayed in highly negative terms, while Palestine is described positively. References to Jews and Hamas carry a negative tone, though less intense. Together, this pattern indicates a consistent bias in evaluative language. In analytical or rational critique, language stays neutral and evidence-based. It evaluates ideas, not groups, and it uses a measured tone. The goal is understanding, not moral positioning. In contrast, moralized expression is emotionally charged. It condemns groups rather than examining arguments, and relies on moral language, words like evil, genocidal, or inhuman. Its purpose is to claim moral superiority, not to seek truth. When academic writings shifts from analytical to moralized, emotion begins to replace evidence, and that's what we measured here. So what does this tell us? That across this data set, Zionism and Israel show the strongest negative valence and intensity. Jews are negative with slightly less force, just a little more negative and intense than Hamas. This mirrors the semantic and argumentative layers, moralizes entirely, feels righteous. That's why we interpret emotion doesn't just accompany meaning, it amplifies it, giving it bias its persuasive power. That's why we interpret it as evidence of linguistic bias rather than legitimate criticism. Before I conclude, I just, so here we see very strongly how strong this is. But the implications of this analysis is that academic and intellectual spaces are not immune to bias. Anti-Semitic framing can appear within scholarly discourse itself. Quantifying tone and structure provides empirical evidence of bias, bridging linguistics, psychology, and anti-Semitism studies. So this method offers a replicable framework to evaluate fairness, consistency, and emotional asymmetry in text, and it raises ethical and institutional questions about how prejudice can masquerade in scholarship. And are tried together, like our semantic analysis and affective analysis and the argumentative layers that also came out of the thematic analysis, show us a triadic model that integrates 3 layers, semantic, argumentative, and affective. Together, they reveal how anti-Semitic discourse in academic writing doesn't rely on open hate, but on a subtle interplay between language, reasoning, and emotions. Semantic structures control moral hierarchies. Argumentative strategies legitimize them through rhetoric, and affective intensity fuels their persuasive power. So this combined model provides objective markers for detecting anti-Semitism in academic discourse. Just very briefly, this echoes historical, the historical sermons from John Chrysostom's that were against Judaizers, but they had strong intensity that then translated into Jews. And that's what John Geiger said, if the Judaizers are the targets of John's wrath, it is the Jews who are the victims. Academic language is very important to be looked at because it carries authority, it transforms idea into knowledge, and if anti-Semitism becomes legitimized through academic discourse, these ideas then seep into curricula, policy, culture, professional training, shaping how generations of students understand Jews and Israel. Looking ahead, I think it would be interesting to see large-scale corpus studies should examine how prevalent such rhetorically disguised hostility is across academic writing, and future research can deepen the affective dimension by integrating emotional and psychophysiological analysis, capturing how readers feel and interpret bias in discourse. And this work calls on the academic community to confront pseudo-scholarship, texts that cloak prejudice in intellectual language with scientific rigorous tools, and ideas that have justified 3 millennia of bigotry must not find new legitimacy under the guise of critical inquiries. Thank you so much for listening, and I want to thank my collaborator for this project, Daniel Milling, for his expertise and great help, and Dr. Karen Nelson for previous work on this subject that we've done and that is in press. Thank you so much, everyone.
And Perla, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. Unfortunately, time is moving on, and we now have to turn over to our second speaker, which I will introduce now. I'm very excited to have Talia Rockman here today. Talia is an MA candidate in sociology at the University of Ottawa, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts in psychology from the University of Guelph and has served as a research assistant on several projects examining the impact of anti-Semitism on Canadian campuses, including the context of EDI, faculty unions, academic freedom, and mental health. And Talia has presented her theoretical framework already on 2 conferences, that is on structural parallels between misogyny and anti-Semitism. So she presented at the 2025 conference on for contemporary anti-Semitism in London, and at the Symposium on Antisemitism at Brock University this year. And Talia plans to pursue a doctoral work, continuing her research on contemporary antisemitism. And Talia Rockman will today present on the following subject. The title talk is The Gentileman's Agreement, Patterns Between Misogyny and Antisemitism. So Talia, welcome. We are eager to hear from your insights, and the floor is yours.
Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking Dr. Mealing and the Center for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism for putting this series together and everyone attending the webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to be a part of this great initiative. I begin my presentation with a synopsis of the 1947 film Gentleman's Agreement, and I use this film to introduce a novel theoretical framework I have been developing, the Gentleman's Agreement. I subsequently summarize my previous work on the structural parallels between misogyny and antisemitism, which provide the basis for my theoretical framework. Using secondary data analysis from the larger research project titled Faculty Experiences of Antisemitism Research, led by Dr. Cary Kogan at the University of Ottawa and Dr. Deidre Butler at Carleton University, Ontario, Canada, I then discussed the provisional findings from 46 interviews with Jewish faculty members on Canadian campuses conducted between October 2024 to September 2025 to highlight how their experiences explicate the moral contract between Jews and non-Jews in progressive academic culture. In the 1940s, a movement in post-war liberal American literature emerged to push back against strains of antisemitism in Western culture known as the anti-Antisemitism movement. Against this backdrop, producer Darryl Zanuck and director Elia Kazan produced Gentleman's Agreement based on the best-selling book by the Jewish writer Laura Hobson. In the film adaptation, Gregory Peck plays a Gentile widowed newspaper journalist named Philip Schuyler Green, who reluctantly accepts an assignment to write about anti-Semitism in America. Peck's character decides that he will go undercover as a Jew for 6 months in New York City, assuming the name of Phil Greenberg and announcing his Jewish identity at every opportunity, in stark contrast to the many Jews hiding or minimizing their identity to uncover anti-Semitism. Few people know Green's true identity as a Gentile: the newspaper editor, his mother, his son, his recently engaged fiancée Kathy, and his childhood Jewish best friend Dave Goldman, played by Jewish actor John Garfield. With the assumed Jewish identity of Phil Greenberg, Phil is subject to several casual anti-Semitic remarks by seemingly decent people, including his fiancée. The friction between Phil and Kathy eventually comes to a head when Phil's son, Tommy, comes home crying after his peers called him a dirty Jew. Instead of condemning the anti-Semitic name-calling, Kathy consoles Tommy by reminding him that he is not Jewish. This response angers Phil, prompting him to tell Kathy that while he does not think she is anti-Semitic, it is the nice and the good people who claim to deplore anti-Semitism that enable it to grow. Kathy later asks Dave to meet, where she finds solace as a Jew tells her that she is not anti-Semitic. However, after further reflection discussion with Dave on her being a passive bystander to anti-Semitic incidents, she eventually realizes that Phil was correct in his assessment, and that her silence enables others to behave anti-Semitically. To prove her enlightenment to Phil, she invites Dave, who could not obtain housing due to discrimination, to stay in her sister's spare house and vows to defend this decision to anyone who objects. The movie ends with Kathy and Phil mending their relationship, and Phil's mother rejoices as the American values of democracy and acceptance prevail. Author and host of the podcast Adventures with Dead Jews, Dara Horn, argues that this film does little to broaden the audience's understanding of Jewish identity and culture and instead flatters the audience. Horn and historian Rachel Gordon discuss how the film's plot mirrored the reality surrounding it. Phil's Jewish secretary changed her last name to a non-Jewish one to evade discrimination. Laura Hobson, the author of Gentleman's Agreement, never used her Jewish last name, as she learned early on that it provoked negative reactions. The Gentile newspaper editor and Phil dismissed the Jewish board members' warning that this story would only create more anti-Semitism. And despite several Jewish movie executives objecting to the production of this film, citing fears of stirring up trouble, the producer, Darryl Zanuck, who related to Peck's character having been mistaken for a Jew and subsequently denied entry to a country club, went ahead with making the film anyways. Gregory Peck, against his agent's advice, played the role of the non-Jewish journalist, who also defied his fiancée in the film by pretending to be Jewish and confronting anti-Semitism. In this way, the film's recurring theme of white saviors, both in the production and the plot, placate non-Jewish Americans' anxieties about pervasive anti-Semitism that limited Jews' social mobility, including the unspoken gentleman's agreement that non-Jews would not rent or sell homes to Jews. The righteousness of this film is contradicted by what followed its release. Gentleman's Agreement was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and several leading non-Jewish actors and the director won or were nominated for individual awards for their roles in the film. The House Un-American Activities Committee hauled the director Elia Kazan, Anne Revere, who played Phil's mother, and John Garfield to testify because of their participation in the film. Kazan gave the names of 8 friends and former colleagues who had been members of the Communist Party in his second hearing in 1952. Revere did not show for her hearing and was blacklisted from Hollywood for almost 20 years. Garfield, who did testify, refused to give names or out his wife as a communist. Garfield subsequently could not find work again and died a year and a half later from a heart attack at just 39 years old. Based on the events that followed the production of the film and the portrayal of Jews in it, Horn conceptualizes the Gentleman's Agreement as an agreement between Jews and non-Jews, in which non-Jews tolerate Jews so long as they are agreeable, powerless, loyal to their host state, and define themselves solely in religious terms, rather than as part of a distinct tribe. In the following sections, I draw from this conceptualization and expand upon it in what I term the Gentleman's Agreement. Whereas the term Gentleman's Agreement refers to the collusive exclusion by a majority group, the Gentleman's Agreement is a bilateral, often implicit, moral contract between Jews and non-Jews. This agreement is asymmetrical in that non-Jews demand moral deference from Jews in exchange for their paternalistic tolerance and conditional inclusion of them. The asymmetrical nature of this agreement, moreover, positions Jews as reliant on the mercy and goodwill of non-Jewish protectors and saviors. It also positions Jews as human givers rather than as human beings, akin to Mann's classification of women in her book, Down Girl, the Logic of Misogyny. As human givers, Jews must prove their worth by material means, via scientific, religious, or cultural contributions. Or they must prove their worth by symbolic means, by being made into an object of evil or of envy. Non-Jews require Jews to adhere to their prescribed and traditional role of being powerless, agreeable, and defining themselves solely in religious terms, rather than as part of a nation or an Or non-Jews expect Jews to approximate their identity by assimilating or blending in. Competing social contracts relating to intersecting identities, such as nationality or gender, additionally shape the social scripts that Jews must adhere to. Furthermore, should non-Jews perceive Jews to be violating the Gentleman's Agreement, for example, by raising concerns of anti-Semitism, non-Jews can revoke their acceptance of Jews. Because this agreement is so deeply embedded within societal norms and social boundaries, its elusiveness creates a sense of phantom acceptance and phantom normalcy. Jews, as a stigmatized group, must act in such a way that the burden of their identity does not seem too heavy, and that bearing this burden does not make them too different from the non-Jews. This phantom acceptance allows for phantom normalcy. Jews understand that this agreement is the best that they can get. So long as Jews cheerfully adhere to their prescribed roles, both non-Jews and Jews may falsely assume that Jews have full, not conditional, acceptance. To demonstrate an individual instantiation of the Gentleman's Agreement and how it presents in left-wing spaces, I begin with an explanation of nice guy syndrome as an instantiation of a similar moral contract women are beholden to. Like Jews, an asymmetrical moral contract based on civility and traditional roles governs the relations between men and women. Gentlemen follow a code of chivalry, the expectation that ladies will honor a parallel social script, putting themselves under the auspices of a gentleman. Put simply, nice guys get, or at least should get, the girl. Coined by psychotherapist Robert Glover in his 2003 book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, nice guy syndrome refers to men who believe that if they are good and do everything right, they will be loved, get their needs met, and have a problem-free life. Glover uses the label nice guy satirically as there is a clear contradiction. The transactional nature that motivates their nice behavior is contingent on reciprocity. Likewise, I use the term nice guy syndrome as a gendered umbrella term that refers to men with a savior complex who think that they are one of the nice ones, the exception to #NotAllMen. Nice guys believe that their niceness towards women entitles them to their trust and often to their bodies. When women reject their advances or accuse them of misogyny, nice guys employ the DARVO technique, which stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, and coined by psychologist Jennifer Freed in 1997. They deny the behavior, attack the accuser, and reverse the roles of victim and offender, such that the perpetrator assumes the victim role and turns the true victim, or the whistleblower, into the offender. Drawing inspiration from nice guy syndrome, I describe nice goy syndrome, which denotes a gender-neutral umbrella term that refers to non-Jews with a savior complex who think that they are one of the nice ones, that they would have saved Anne Frank, for example. Nice goys also believe that their niceness towards Jews entitles them to Jews' trust and often to appropriate Jews' identities for their own gain. When Jews fail to show moral deference or accuse them of anti-Semitism, nice goys employ the Livingstone formulation, a term coined by sociologist David Hirsch to describe a common response to accusations of anti-Semitism by characterizing the accuser of acting in bad faith and of weaponizing anti-Semitism to silence criticism of Israel. Nice guy syndrome and nice goy syndrome illustrate the banality and the commonality of people harboring and justifying their misogynistic and anti-Semitic beliefs. I use the terms nice guys and nice goys deliberately, conscious of the indignation they may elicit. I also use the term syndrome satirically to draw attention to the harmful psychologization of misogyny and anti-Semitism, and how that enables the excusal, justification, and victim blaming in response to the accusations of misogyny or anti-Semitism. Nice guys and nice goys further need reassurance from women and Jews at the individual level that they are benevolent, and in return deem those compliant as cool girls and cool Jews. Cool girls and cool Jews are those who adhere to their prescribed roles in exchange for the acceptance, safety, and protection of nice guys and nice goys. They consequently engage in a form of self-objectification and self-tokenism on behalf of nice guys and nice goys. Women and Jews may opt into this contract for strategic reasons, or because they genuinely ascribe to the ideals of the role of the cool girl or the cool Jew as they profess. In the latter case, cool girls and cool Jews participate in their own exploitation, often branding it as empowerment. They claim that feminism and Zionism are outdated social movements or ideologies of past generations, and unnecessary given the equality and safety women and Jews enjoy in the West today. Accordingly, they feel uncomfortable with power and prefer to be subservient and reliant on protection from others. This moral contract between women and men and non-Jews and Jews make women's and Jews' virtue contingent on existing as human givers. They are valued for their selflessness and their service to others. Cool girls and cool Jews will also distance themselves from women and Jews who deviate from their prescribed roles, who seek power and autonomy, and who voice their concern with misogynistic or anti-Semitic behavior from men and non-Jews. Cool girls and cool Jews will use and be used for their identity to shield themselves and nice guys and nice goys from accusations of misogyny or anti-Semitism. In this sense, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They use their identity to identify as part of a collective, for example, as a woman or as a Jew, but in the same breath, they will distance themselves from this collective. For example, I'm not like other girls, or I am not like other Jews. I am one of the cool ones. Cool girls and cool Jews also argue that as a member of their community, they possess special insider knowledge to rule if the accuser was crying wolf or if their accusation is valid. In this way, they too use the DARVO technique or the Livingstone formulation when other members of their communities raise concerns about misogyny or anti-Semitism. Both cool girls and cool Jews attempt to approximate the behaviors of nice guys and nice goys, hoping to reap the same benefits. Yet they fail to realize that conditional acceptance does not offer genuine or long-term safety. Cool girls still inhabit a man's world as women, and cool Jews still inhabit a goy's world as Jews. To summarize this theoretical framework, the Gentileman's agreement refers to the enduring, often implicit, structural moral contract that governs the social relations between Jews and non-Jews. This agreement uses civility as a form of control to keep Jews in their place, meaning that non-Jews agree to act like Gentilemen with the assumption that Jews must adhere to their prescribed roles as good Jews. It operates at the macro level, differs in its idealized Jew across cultures, social settings, political leanings, and over time, and it exists along a continuum of acceptance and rejection. The competing social contracts related to Jews' intersecting identities shape how they navigate this agreement. Perpetuating and reflecting this governing political phenomenon, nice guy syndrome operates at the interpersonal level, where non-Jews react with indignation, resentment, anger, or perplexity when they feel that Jews do not reciprocate with the implied rewards. At both the micro and the macro levels, Jews are forced to occupy categories as cool Jews that are external to them and are to the benefit of the group who has the power to impose the contract. I now turn to the provisional findings of 46 interviews with Jewish professors across Canadian campuses, disciplines, and political leanings to examine the instrumentalization of the Gentileman's agreement and nice boy syndrome within a predominantly progressive environment. While Canadians generally have positive views of Jews and harbor milder anti-Semitic attitudes than other Western countries, since 2002, anti-Semitic incidents have been rising across the country. The Canadian government statistics show Jews remain the most frequently targeted religious group in Canada by number of reported hate crimes, particularly after the surge of anti-Semitism following the Hamas-led October 7, 2023 attack on Israel and the ensuing war. To understand the seeming discrepancy between relatively low levels of Canadians' hostility towards Jews and the drastic increase in anti-Semitism, I turn to legal scholar David Schraub's 2020 article titled "Loving Jews and Hating Jews." Here, Schraub argues that the love Americans profess for Jews, known as philo-Semitism, does not mean an absence of anti-Semitism. Rather, it is a conditional love for Jews so long as they adhere to their imagined ideal, be it a Trump-loving conservative with Judeo-Christian values, or the anti-Zionist social justice-oriented Democrat in left-wing spaces. Participants spoke of the phantom normalcy and the phantom acceptance central to the Gentleman's Agreement, in which Canadian professors stress fostering and maintaining collegiality and demonstrating their virtue by adhering to the dominant progressive discourses. Participants' testimonies mirror the screen frames demonstrated on the slide. So, for example, one Arab Jewish female humanities professor spoke about the, quote, peer pressure to conform and perform agreement with the top-down imposition that Zionism is no longer kosher, with those who refuse to perform agreement with this position being labeled a pariah and not passing the litmus test for a moral citizen of the university, end quote. Another participant who teaches law hypothesized that this demand to perform agreement with the distorted reality of Jewish identity and Zionism reflects non-Jewish professors adamantly convinced that, quote, they know what right looks like at the end of the day. They're binding up their good vision of being a good and just person into the fact that they're going to get to that perfect world. And so it's perfectly okay for them to make those assumptions about people's positions, end quote. She further stated that proponents of this way of thinking are, quote, happy to assume that everybody agrees that the war in Gaza is genocide, and that if I were to assert otherwise, the only thing that I would be asserting is because I'm a Jew, I clearly can't see what's right and good, and they could perfectly well explain to me my own history in order to get to that outcome. Because clearly, if they told me what was right and good, I would be on the side of right and good, and I'd become one of those good Jews who could engage with them on a different level, end quote. Together, these participants' testimonies point to the implicit moral order that non-Jewish professors, as Gentilemen, expect Jews to obey, and that their defiance of this order begs for correction from someone who is enlightened. This savior complex of non-Jews who believe themselves nice and who require Jews to confer this title of a nice guy at the individual level is additionally illustrated through a female science professor's recounting of a non-Jewish male professor sending her, quote, unsolicited messages saying that the rapes reported in the October 7th attacks were debunked and that there was no sexual assault and that he's done his own research, and that he just needs her to know that that was used as justification for the genocide in Gaza. He needs her to know that that's not true, end quote. When asked about her colleague's rationale in persisting to convince her that the sexual violence of October 7th did not occur, she mused that, quote, I think they want me to change my mind. I think they think, but you're a good person. I know you. as your office mate for 3 years. You're my friend. You've fallen prey to Israeli propaganda. End quote. She further stated that she thought it was evangelical. In refusing to accept this proselytizing narrative, this participant violated the implicit moral contract by refusing to show moral deference to the non-Jewish professor acting as the savior. The undermining and the condescension of that Jewish professors experience illustrates a blatant contradiction in the behavior in their non-Jewish colleagues. Instead, as the Arab Jewish humanities professor put it, quote, people think that performing this agreement is actually doing the actions of tikkun olam as a substitute for doing the actions of doing good in the world, end quote. To preserve their self-image as nice guys, non-Jews rely on Jews to perform acceptability by downplaying their Jewishness, treating it as superficial, or publicly repudiating Zionism. Like their previous slide, the examples given will also reflect the frames from the movie demonstrated on the screen. One tenure-track social sciences professor with an identifiably Jewish last name said that he takes some comfort in the absence of Jews in his small town, as it allows him to hide in plain sight and avoid becoming a lightning rod for anti-Semitism. The female professor teaching law said that she had known throughout her career that, quote, being Jewish was okay, being pro-Israel is not widely acceptable within the social milieu. It's fine as long as you talk about things that require people to acknowledge and accommodate you as Jewish. It makes them feel good about themselves. Oh, good, you take that day off. Go celebrate with your community. Have a meaningful holiday. But the minute it becomes something that talks about some of those deeper, more complicated historical things, those elements, namely Zionism, that may make up a Jewish identity and might be core to that, well, that's not cool because you're aligning with all the wrong people, end quote. Participants moreover describe the tokenizing of anti-Zionist Jews as one male professor in social sciences put it, quote, anti-Zionist Jews are actually given sort of a positive right to speak on behalf of the community. They're tokenized, but they're also very vocal. So it's like they're called upon and they're willingly contributing to this idea that they speak for the community. And I suppose they would be quote unquote accepted, but none of those that I know are actually expressing their Judaism in a very visible way. So it's interesting. I don't know if it's a Faustian bargain, I'll give up Israel and I'll be accepted, or they're actually giving up more than that, end quote. The willingness of anti-Zionist Jews or cool Jews to participate in their own objectification and exploitation results in them causing more damage than anything else because they are the enablers, as one female Israeli Jewish humanities professor lamented. The lauding of anti-Zionist Jews as the cool Jews and the related denigration of Jews who identify as Zionists results in the legitimization of testimonial injustice. Jewish testimony is viewed with suspicion and skepticism, and non-Jews decide, quote, whether slurs that are thrown at us are anti-Semitic or not, end quote, as one male professor in science stated. Jewish academics therefore occupy a position in which they are stigmatized as Jews and continually subjected to moral scrutiny as presumed Zionists. This dynamic produces a state of perpetual trial in which non-Jewish professors act as the arbiters of Jewish legitimacy, seeking signs of political transgression to reaffirm their own moral authority. As one male professor teaching Jewish studies noted, quote, you see how people respond when you tell them you work in Jewish studies. If people don't know you're Jewish or you're working in Jewish studies, they may have one set of ideas about you and treat you a certain way. And then as soon as you announce your Jewish identity publicly, and by publicly, I mean it could be a subtle thing like saying Yiddish is my home language or something like this, you'd see people have to reconfigure sometimes, and depending on where they were situated politically, they will interpret everything you say and do through the lens of your position about Zionism. If I say I oppose boycotts on Israel, I don't have to say I'm a Zionist. I just have to say that I oppose boycotts on Israel. Then you're in the Zionist category, end quote. Within Canadian campus culture, Zionism is effectively, quote, the love that dare not speak its name, end quote, as one participant in medicine communicated. In this way, Jews cannot express their full selves within the confines of the Gentileman's agreement. Intersecting identities additionally shape the stipulations of a moral contract between Jews and non-Jews and how they mitigate these challenges. For example, interviews with Israeli Jewish professors revealed the additional stigma of being both Jewish and Israeli, with one participant explaining that she constantly had to fight to tell people what's going on in Israel and to normalize Israel. and that, quote, in the war of opinions, she views herself as enlisted for the rest of her life in that war for public opinion, end quote. The Jewish Arab female humanities professor detailed how her identity as Jewish and Arab, a woman and a professor, creates unique obstacles in navigating the broader campus culture and interactions with students. Specifically, she discusses the difficulties in negotiating the power imbalance she holds as a professor of her students and the concurrent gendered expectation they have of her to unconditionally nurture and love them, the same way she would for her child. While she disrupts the expedient classification of Jews as white, given her Arab Jewish background and darker skin color, she details how she is still lumped in with the, quote unquote, white imperialist Jewish group when she refuses to perform agreement, end quote, with the anti-Zionist narrative. She summarized her predicament in that, quote, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, or someone who doesn't quite fit into a category, it's a double-edged sword. People are less likely to question you, but then you're more vulnerable, end quote. A female humanities professor discussed how pre-October 7th, she had already been wary of violence on campus because a student had stabbed a feminist professor teaching a gender studies lecture a couple years ago at another university. She recounted how, quote, at some point, I had this moment where we were about to post all the classes and what class she was teaching on our campus website. And our chair just said, if anyone doesn't want their names posted as the professor of this class, you need to let me know. And I kind of thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, which one am I not posting it for? I did take my name off. Is it because I'm a woman or is it because I'm Jewish? I guess it's both, end quote. This account exemplifies what I term misogyny, the intersection between anti-Semitism and misogyny in Jewish women's lives. However, gender also shapes Jewish men's encounters with anti-Semitism, suggesting that gendered anti-Semitism should be understood more expansively. In one case, an outspoken male humanities professor shared that anonymous social media accounts impersonated him, falsely portraying him as homosexual or non-binary, unfaithful to his wife, inappropriate with students, and sexually inadequate, which draws in both anti-Semitic and gendered tropes that emasculate Jewish men. This flattening and distortion of Jewish identity and overall objectification of Jews is powerfully captured by one professor's incredulity at the seeming indifference of a colleague she had known for 19 years, learning that her child required police protection to attend school. Quote, you are people who honestly, in your heart of hearts, believe in Canada that a 7-year-old should go to school with police protection. I have nothing that I can say to you. There's just nothing left. You don't treat me as a human being. You haven't recognized my humanity as a Canadian. You just haven't. You're more concerned about political posturing, end quote. Through these stories, we can see how a moral, not a mortal, contract underpins the Gentileman's agreement. Non-Jews do not see Jews as human beings, but as human givers of symbolic and material means. It is the, quote, applying of Jews to a higher moral compass than everybody else, applying double standards to Jews and Jewish people in general, reducing Jews to symbols in the service of something else, in the service of, for instance, a progressive European identity cleansed of the sins of the Holocaust, using Jews to construct a world that is not based on fact and real experience, but the way that you want to imagine it, or to bolster narratives that you want to imagine that have no basis in truth or reality, using Jewish people or symbols of them in this sort of post-truth era and sort of armchair anthropology, which is kind of colonial and is becoming increasingly normative, as conveyed by the Arab Jewish humanities professor. A professor in medicine, after detailing an anti-Semitic incident that occurred in the hospital he practices in, and the consequent impact on his morale, further spoke about the positioning and valuation of Jews as material human givers. Quote, I realized in retrospect that probably a lot of my heal the world outlook has been a desperate desire for the non-Jewish community to accept, love, and appreciate me for who I am, and that my extended hours I put into this career to save people who are all 100% not Jews, because I don't live in a Jewish environment, is at some level for me, probably me trying to endear myself to these people. And I just realized after the Canadian election and this hospital incident that no matter how many people I heal, and no matter how many people I save, they'll never love me and they'll never appreciate me. And I'll always be able to be discarded no matter how much good I've done, end quote. The film Gentleman's Agreement concludes with Phil and his fiancée Kathy embracing and reuniting after he learns that she concedes in allowing his Jewish friend to rent her sister's vacant home, despite the gentleman's agreement not to rent homes to Jews, and that she will protect them from any trouble. The movie's happy ending therefore delivers a compelling and a comforting message for a non-Jewish audience that they too can be saviors for Jews they deem worthy of saving and in return be granted the title of a nice guy. In both its production and plot, this film relegates Jews to supporting roles in the moral development of non-Jewish characters. The film does not mention the Shoah, America's immigration quotas, and their reluctance to take in Jewish refugees from Europe. It also sidelines and reduces Jewish identity to an overly simplistic caricature of people who look like Gentiles and who are religious in a slightly different way than Christians. Instead, the film derives its popularity and wide acclaim from its dramatization of non-Jewish self-discovery as good people. Anti-Semitism becomes a matter of individual prejudice that can be overcome rather than an objective political phenomenon, allowing the film to stage a kind of moral pageantry in which Gentile decency is both tested and affirmed. The spectacle of tolerance thus serves as a mirror for non-Jewish virtue rather than a reckoning with Jewish vulnerability. In this sense, Gentleman's Agreement enacts the very moral contract that underpins the Gentileman's Agreement. Jews' vulnerability as a minority in a host country affords non-Jews the opportunity to perform their own goodness. This moral structure of Gentleman's Agreement persists in contemporary academic life. When Jewish professors share experiences of anti-Semitism, they are met with hollow and private gestures of empathy that reaffirm civility, while avoiding public displays of solidarity. Others pedestalize anti-Zionist Jews and comfort themselves in the illusion that they are not anti-Semitic, they are one of the nice guys. The film remains contemporary, not because the plot nor the producers meaningfully challenge anti-Semitism, but because its moral framework endures. Non-Jews still seek redemption through the very Jews they marginalize. I would like to thank the PIs Dr. Deidre Butler at Carleton University and Cary Kogan at the University of Ottawa for their permission for use in this research, research assistants Dana Strauss at the University of Ottawa and Malka Bortman at Carleton University for their roles in collecting this data, and of course to the participants for sharing their stories and for entrusting us to tell them. Thank you very much.